I've just finished sketching this image of a musician, a trombone player, on top of this messy background. So my next step is to paint negative around it, the negative space, and block out this messiness. I'm going to try and leave some of the marks and colors that I've got inside the figure as part of the clothing and the kind of to give it abstraction within the form. Let's get started working on this. So here you see me carving in around the figure, just using a neutral paint. It may be white with a little bit of color in it. And I'm using a wide Liquitex brush. It's a stubby handle, and I like this brush for the amount of control that I can get when I'm working and I want to carve in shapes and yet cover up a lot of background. So in my paintings, the background gets painted several times, so I'm not worried about really a good job right at the beginning. In fact, I like to leave some of the underpainting to show through. And as I start refining the figure more, or perhaps changing shapes, I'm going to need to do the background again. And also, as the painting changes, you find that the background color doesn't really jive with it. So it's just a way of blocking in the figure quickly, and this could be multiple figures as well, but in this case I am just doing a single musician. Here I'm using a catalyst wedge that has a little divot cut into it, and I am writing also back into the surface just to give a little bit of interest and pattern on this negative space area. So I'm just doing some asemic writing, and this is just my process. A lot of this may not show at the end, but it's how I stay playful and involved in my painting. So a lot of times when I draw this out with chalk, it won't be 100% correct, and I may have to change things as I go, but that's also part of the process. Now perhaps if I was projecting a really good drawing onto my canvas, I wouldn't have to change the painting. I would know it already worked, but because I just rough sketch it in with chalk, oftentimes it's not as accurate as it should be. And when you expand it to a larger size, you see things that need to change as you continue working on it. So I'm starting to define the trombone here, and this is the first time I've actually painted a trombone as a single instrument, and I have used it in some of my group jazz paintings, but never showing the whole instrument. So this is quite different. So just mocking it in, and you will see that this changes over time. Still trying to keep as much of the background in my figure as possible. Adding a bit of details into the face area. Again, carving in the negative space. So I kind of go back and forth between the negative and the positive shapes. And a lot of times it's a lot easier to see the negative for me. And perhaps it's because I've worked this way for so long. But I think if you start working that way, a really good book that you can get is from Betty Edwards, called Drawing on the Right Side of the Brain. And she really goes a lot into the negative drawing and looking at the shapes around things opposed to the actual item that you're drawing. And I think it's really valuable because the thing with our brains is that we think we know what something looks like, and we draw from memory rather than really looking at the actual subject as much. So by drawing the negative space, we're seeing something new, and I think we get more accuracy that way. So I'm adding a little bit more color now, trying to define the shapes a little bit more, bring out the arms. My objective, though, is always to try and save as much of the background energy as I can, because I find that it just really gives a painting the personality when it's from that underpainting and not all painted in. But of course it can be busy and not look cohesive. So I have to continue adding and subtracting, defining the hand shape a little bit more here. I'm holding the canvas down because it's a long, narrow canvas and it tends to bounce away from the wall. So just adding the long part of the trombone in and keeping my brush moving on all parts. So I want to make sure that I keep adding the color I'm using on different places in my painting. Standing back from your work is really important as well. Now I'm using an image here to try and make sure that I get the proper placements of the eyes, and on this particular musician is wearing glasses, so I'm going to try and put the glasses in. So I'm drawing in the glasses with some, I believe it's chalk pastel. You could use chalk, graphite, just trying to get the right proportions. I like going back and forth between drawing and painting as well, because I think it's another way to kind of keep things fresh and change things as you go, and some of those marks stay in your painting as part of the reference of your process, and I find that very enjoyable as well. So still defining the shapes here, and again moving around the painting. I've decided to put a glaze coat of quinacridone nickel azo gold over the background. So I've thinned it with some water, and I'm also using a spray bottle of water just to keep it very wet and move it around. I want it to be just a thin coat. When you do this transparent glaze, it leaves some of the undercolor to show through and the marks and stuff. So I really do enjoy using transparency for that reason. Opaque paint can tend to flatten things out a lot, whereas your transparent paints can give your work a lot of depth because it does allow previous layers to show through. Your artist quality paints will have a chart on them indicating their transparency or opacity. A lot of the paint companies hand paint these charts on the label. If they don't, you can just make one of your own simply by using a black felt marker and painting over it. That works really well too. So it's good to know the difference. Now, sorry, I've gone off camera a little bit here. Working on a long canvas, it's hard to get a lot of it in the frame. So now I'm going back in over this, and it's still a little bit wet, and I'm putting in a lighter shade. I've changed my mind on that background color. And this is what I said earlier. The background often changes to suit the painting. And as you're working on a painting, it can change a lot, and how you are feeling about the mood of the painting can change as well. So don't be afraid to paint your background several times when you're working this way. It creates for a rich background. I am not one that likes the texture of the canvas showing in my work, so I tend to build up many layers or use thick paint. Again, a little mist with water will help keep this more fluid. Every once in a while you may see me look sideways, and that's because I am checking my monitor to make sure that I am still in the frame and I am still recording. I've been known to run out of room on my card and think I'm recording, and I'm not. There you saw me just lift the painting and place it on a higher nail. I find this very convenient rather than working on an easel and having to raise and lower it. I just don't like how the canvas is moving on this particular one out from the wall, but other than that, I really do like the system of having the nails or screws. In my case, I use screws into plywood, and I do have a video on that if you want to see how I did it. And the only drawback I've had is I feel like I need another row, which I will add. And sometimes the back of the stretcher bars, if they have braces on the larger canvas, line up exactly with where my nails are, making it really difficult to hang the painting. So that is one of the drawbacks I've found. But I do like being able to put multiple works next to each other to work on them simultaneously. So just working on refining the shape of the figure a little bit, and you saw me working on the legs as well. Doing some more definition on the trombone area. This painting isn't from my imagination. I'm not relying on the photo reference, but I did use a photo reference to map this out. I try not to use too small a brush too much because I tend to get really kind of diddly with it, and I don't think that is a good thing. Putting in some highlights now, just so that this pops out a little bit more, enriching the color. And I've changed my mind on the background again. So I've decided to try something dark. So you can let me know in the comments if you prefer the lighter background or if you're enjoying the darker background. So I've mixed this paint. It's not pure black. It's a gray made with purple and white and I think some ultramarine blue. You'll notice that the background makes a huge difference in how the painting looks. So it is important. So using a smaller brush just to get in around the shapes here. I'm doing some asemic writing with a bamboo skewer back into the wet paint here, just bringing a little bit of the yellow back up. Going to work on it sideways. This is going to be easier for me, and it's also going to be easier for you to see what I'm doing. So bear with me as I work on this sideways. Sometimes I will actually turn my painting right upside down to work on some parts of it. This is a great way also to get out of your left brain and push yourself into a different space, access your right brain. So I'm going to let go of all of the yellow in the background. So never be afraid to try something. If you end up going back to the previous background color or a new color on top of this, you are building up interest and history, and it just adds enrichment to your painting. The other thing I often do is try it on an app on my iPad. So take a picture and test out some different colors. So here you see it now with the dark background. And I'm sorry, the camera angle seems to have got changed a bit. It's not as easy for you to see. Now I'm going to go back and use the photo reference here to block this in. So now my negative space is going to be dark because my background is dark. And I believe before I had the not the shape so much, but the angle of the openings there in the trombone incorrect. So I find out with the darker background, certainly the trombone is popping out a lot more. So livening up some of the color in the jacket. Often I paint over the colors that are already there just to enrich them. A lot of times my underpainting doesn't have that much paint on it, so I won't actually change the design or the shape, but just add more color over top of it to make it richer and really saturated. Like I said, I don't like thin, skimpy paint and thin colors. I really like to have deep saturation, and you're going to get a better saturation of color with better quality paint as well. So you can start your underpainting. If you're doing a messy background from scratch, you can use some artist quality paint, or student grade paint is fine as well, and then switch up to your artist paint as you go forward on the top layers. If you're just learning, feel free to experiment just with the student grade paint, and don't even worry about working on canvas. Work on paper. Sometimes when we're working on canvas, our painting becomes precious and we feel like it has to work because we spent money on the canvas. So a lot of times working on paper or even cardboard, brown paper bags opened up, any of these things can keep you loose and free. So it's most important to do quantity over quality. when you're learning, because that's how you really learn. I always find that on the hands and the face, I have to spend a lot of time and go back and forth between them several times, and I tend to leave their final details till the end of the painting. So just trying to put in a little structure and shading with the hands. And again, I like to keep them very abstract and not add too much detail. And I find it's harder than it looks. So I hope you enjoyed the video. Leave your comments, and we'll see you soon.